This is Alexander Hinton and Catherine Hinton interviewing Joann Detwyler, our grandmother. So
It's November 28th, 2015, and Grammy is 94. Alex and Grammy have already started the interview, and they got to the end of World War II, but we're going to go back a little bit and talk about Grammy's time during the war and what you were doing in terms of your job. So I guess start there, Grammy.
Are we going to start at the end of the war, a new life? Or
So let's start in Fredericksburg. When did you move to Fredericksburg?
1945.
What month do you remember?
I moved to Fredericksburg because Carl was in the Army that trained recruits, and his unit was being transferred to A.P. Hill, which is below Fredericksburg. So that's when he called me on the phone and said, go to Fredericksburg and find a place to live. Now, we were into that. So we went down to, there were three of us, the colonel's wife, the major's wife, and Carl's wife. He was the second lieutenant, first lieutenant. So we went, the men were being transferred because they were in charge of setting up a training camp at A.P. Hill. So we three women packed our things up we were living in Luray, Virginia, in a boarding house, and went to Fredericksburg. Now, Fredericksburg was a service town that had the Marines, the Navy, and the Army, all whose wives converged on them wanting places to live. So it was a very hard place to find a place to live. So I found a room, when Carl called, I told him I had a room, so he came up to see me. He took one look at the room and he didn't like it. It wasn't in the kind of neighborhood he wanted me to be in. So he found there was a college in Fredericksburg, a women's college, and they had approved places for women to stay. So he got the names of approved places and he found me a room in this approved place with a woman. So that was the beginning of my life in Fredericksburg.
How did you feel about this move?
The move?
Did you agree with Paul that you were happy to move, or did you disagree a little, or how was that? How did you take the news that you needed to find a new place?
In the war, I mean, don't forget this is the height of the war, because you didn't stop to think. It just meant that I could see more of him. We could see more of it if we were closer to them. That's how we ended up in Luray, Virginia for 6 weeks. So you just stopped to think. We just went to Fredericksburg and found a place to live.
So Paul was working in Fredericksburg, but you could not live together?
He was in the Army. This was the Army. He was in the Army.
So he was living in the barracks
and
somewhere?
A.P. Hill is an Army post below Fredericksburg. So, and they were transferring the whole training unit to A.P. Hill. Just tell your wife to move to Fredericksburg.
So how far away were you then from each other?
No, it was maybe 15, 20 miles.
Okay.
But you see, I had already given up my government job, and made the move from Virginia up to Luray, which it only lasted so I could be closer to him.
What were you doing in Luray? Did you have a job there?
No, I was just there for 6 weeks. We got a room in a boarding house. We three women, and we weren't there very long because the training camp on Skyline Drive was training the recruits, the draftees, and they were planning for an invasion through Italy, through the mountains of Italy. So they had this training Luray is Skyline Drive. And so then, this time though, they were changing their mind about an invasion to invasion, and they were going to invade the way they did on the ground. So the final training of the recruits was moved to AP Hill.
To near Fredericksburg.
All this was very short time.
Okay, so then when you got to Fredericksburg, what did you do for a job?
Well, first I found a place to live. There was down on the main street of town, there was a cemetery and a 4-unit apartment building owned by Mr. Clark. And then, of course, there were no vacancies for anything. So every day I would walk downtown and I would go to his office and ask him if we could get an apartment there. So eventually we got a 2-bedroom apartment. Of course, Carl wasn't there. He was, this is wartime. And so we got the apartment. We stayed there for a while, and I couldn't stand not working. I met a few people, nice people, but I wanted to get a job. I had a bicycle. I didn't have a car. We only had the car. Carl had it. So I think I must have answered an ad in the paper or something for this dairy that needed office help. So I went down and applied. They didn't like to hire service people because they knew we didn't stay very long. And it was, the job was in the billing department, doing the billing on a great big billing machine like that. Of course, I never even seen one, but they hired me. So I worked there then, and as long as we stayed in Fredericksburg, which was about a year.
Did you like it?
Yes, the people were very nice, and it was, I was doing something. So that was my life in Fredericksburg.
Do you remember how much you made?
No, not much. Those were the days of low wages.
How often would you see Pa?
Oh, maybe once a weekend he would come in.
Just for like a night, or could you?
He'd spend at least one night. Yeah.
So by this time, how many years had you been married?
This was 45. 5 years, I guess.
And had you ever lived together?
No. Not yet, except. So anyway, it was.
Were you frustrated, or do you remember feeling fed up with not being able to see your husband and live with your husband?
With what?
Do you remember being frustrated that you couldn't live with your husband?
No. You don't understand the stress of the war. Tomorrow he could be sent to Europe or something, and you just do each day and take it. If they came in, it was a treat, and if they didn't, he usually must have been able to call me.
Were there like events or organizations for Army wives to get together and get to know each other or anything like that?
The town was loaded with service wives, just loaded with them. The colonel's wife, like all these little southern towns, there's always a grand old dame, and there was one in Fredericksburg, and she had a lovely house in the middle of town, and she had a little cottage on the ground. So she was very exclusive about who got to live in that little cottage. So the colonel's wife got the little cottage.
Ah.
That was interesting.
Did you have friends whose husbands were actually fighting or who had died during this time?
Oh yeah, everybody you knew was fighting, and several of my high school classmates were in the Pearl Harbor ships that I knew, and it was so then then we lived that way. It was a nice little town. I walked to town every day and rode my bike to my job, my bicycle. It was pleasant. I went to the dentist, lived. And
Were you in Fredericksburg up until the end of the war?
so then, yes, then the end of the war was announced. And this is where I'm hazy. I have the recollection that the war ended and you left. He came.
Mm-hmm.
They did. They discharged him almost immediately.
Well, was this victory in Europe or victory in Japan that signaled the end of the war for you guys?
In Europe, after the invasion.
So there was no talk about Paul having to go into the military work with the Pacific War.
No. Well, he was in the military. I mean, in service the whole time.
Right, but he was only in the European theater. They didn't try to mobilize people to go into the Japanese theater afterwards. That's interesting.
So anyway, we had a car. We got in a car and we lived in Alexandria. See, I had a real good job. I was in the government. I was secretary to the War Food Administrator. And so with that...
Wait, how did you get that job? How did that happen? When you talked about you were working on the billing machine.
Well, you have to go back to my government service. And Carl's in the Army, and I'm living in Washington.
Oh, okay.
And working in the Department of Agriculture. And Wickard was agriculture secretary. And he didn't like the way the agriculture was performing. FDR didn't. So he formed a new government agency, War Food Administration. He hired a man from Texas to come up and run it and set up an office in Washington. And I was chosen to be one of the secretaries when he got to Washington. He brought his own secretary. So it was a good job. So then he had Judge Marvin Jones, he was a lawyer. He had an assistant, Ashley Sellers, who was also a lawyer. So I was wanted to be Mr. Sellers' secretary. So I was transferred to that job. It was a good job, so I had a good salary and good job. But then the decision was, Carl was up with the training, that you either saw your mate and went with him or you didn't. So I gave up my job and went up there to be near him. That's how I got in Luray from there on. So then back to the car. Since I had this good job, I was entitled to a parking space, which was a real plum. And I had an apartment out in Barcroft, and there were two men who didn't have to go to war, worked in agriculture. So we worked out an arrangement that they would drive me into agriculture and park in my parking space, which was good for them and good for me. So and then later on they sold, one of them sold the car they had, and we bought it. That's where we got a car. So in Fredericksburg we had a car.
But Paul had it. You had the bike.
Mm-hmm.
So then
I had my bicycle. He had a car and I had my bicycle.
So then when the war ended, what did you do? What did you all do?
I cannot remember what we did with furniture. We had furniture. But anyway, we took off. We had our car and we went south. I had never met any of his family. So we drove south and met his family along the way and introduced me to the South. Then we came back and went directly to Washington.
Where did you meet his family? In Georgia?
Mm-hmm.
In Georgia? Is that where you met his family?
No, we went back to Washington.
No, but where did you meet Pa's family?
Oh, in Georgia and Florida, the places he had lived, where his mother had lived. And I think we went all the way to Key West that time. And we didn't have much money.
What were your impressions of the South at that time and his family?
My greatest impression, he had an aunt one of his mother's sisters, who was married to a lawyer in a little town called Lumpkin, Georgia. And we went there. She invited us for lunch. She had a cook. Oh, I was so impressed. She had this lovely lunch and a cook, a black cook. So that's my big impression of the South. Don't forget, I'm still very young.
Right.
So we would visit different people of his family that was still alive.
So was his mom still alive?
She was in Washington. She was in Washington. Yes, she was still alive. She was in Washington now. She lived in Washington.
Okay.
But he had a sister in Florida and a sister in Georgia. And so this aunt and several other aunts. We went to Delray Beach. I remember that. That was my first glimpse of the southern beach. So when our money ran out, we came back and went to Washington. And they had decreed that all veterans were entitled to get their job back at the same salary level as when they were drafted. Of course, he had the lowest paying job in the whole civil service. But they took him back, so he had a job to go to. We couldn't find a place to live. And along Memorial Boulevard, below the airport in Washington, they had built these like motel cheap units for the girls they hired during the war, the typists, the government girls. So the only place we could get a room was one of those units. So we took that. And of course he went to work, and I was lying there in that little room. It was sort of like this on a much rougher scale. So I was lying there with nothing to do. The door opened. The iceman came in, walked and deposited the ice in the thing. Well, that settled it. I'm not going to live like this. So I got the one edge, and I got a job. And that's when, that was with the United Nations had a branch, Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, in Washington, and it was just a young federally staff. So I went out there, and they hired me, and that was when I met Virginia and Eric. Eric was the English representative, and the man I worked for was a Russian, Ignatiev. His family had fled Russia during their revolution, and so I worked for him. I worked there, and Virginia was Eric's assistant.
Is this still 1945, or is this
No.
1946?
This must have been 40. When was the war over?
1945.
Well, this must have been 46. And with that job, they were having worldwide conferences. So they were having their very first conference in Denmark. And so I went to that. Got to go to that. And that was a real experience. And first time I'd flown, first time I'd been in Europe. And
did you go with Paul, or did you go alone?
oh no, Paul's working and I'm working.
And neither of you are living together.
Well, we were living together in that
Oh,
row out,
okay.
and that.
Right.
Oh, and I forgot to tell you that it had red walls and a green ceiling.
So you were Christmas time all year long.
So they were pretty rough. They've since been torn down. They were torn down after the war.
How long were you in Denmark for?
About 10 days, and that was a real experience. The conference.
How did you get to Denmark?
We flew to Paris, stayed overnight in Paris, went to the Follies, and then went next day, and then went on to Denmark from there.
Copenhagen, or was it a different place?
Mm-hmm.
Was it Copenhagen?
Copenhagen, yeah.
Copenhagen.
And it was fun. I had a hotel room, and I walked by myself, and every morning I could walk to work, and those that book on the pictures in the dining room over there was my route. They had book stalls, and I would walk them from my hotel to the conference center every day. It was a wonderful experience.
Did you see evidence of the war in Europe?
Oh yes, the Danes, they were occupied. So everybody wore a little pin with a cross on it, all the Danes, to show that they resented being occupied. I had one too. They gave me one. Yeah, they were very, very much a victim of the war.
How did they feel about Americans? Did they like you guys a lot?
Oh yeah. We were well liked in those days.
Hard to imagine that now, isn't
it? One, you know how I like ice water. Well, of course, the Danes, the Europeans, they don't drink water like we do. But every day I'd have to have my ice water. So finally they set up a little table in the hall with a pitcher with ice in it, water for me. and then it was written up in the newspaper.
This American woman who had to have
American who had to have her.
That's hilarious.
Her ice water.
So what were you doing in Denmark? Were you like a
secretary?
We
you have those big colonies. You have to have an office staff. Oh. So we were the office staff. There were about 4 of us, I think, 4 or 5 on the office staff.
Did Virginia go too?
Hmm?
Did Virginia go too?
Yes, I guess so. Yeah. I think that was before she and Eric became in love. Because she and I traveled together, yeah. You should see the pictures. We were dressed to the hilt. We had on good-looking suits. We had hats. We had gloves. We had purse. That's our picture getting on the airplane to go to Europe.
Was this your first time out of the country?
Yeah.
This must have been very exciting for you.
It was fun.
How did Pa feel about not being able to go with you?
I guess, I don't know. You don't understand, you just have to understand the feelings of those times. Everybody was glad to do what they could do and glad to have a job. So it wasn't...
Did Pa ever give you a hard time about working? Did he ever not want you to work?
No.
No.
I always worked. You see, again, going back to this wedding that you all think is so queer, we didn't start off like a lot of people. We were separated from the day we were married.
Yeah.
It's true.
So that creates a lot of independence and but very...
Did men ever react in a sexist manner when they found out that you were married but continued to work?
No. Again, this was wartime. They were good.
Well, this is after the war now.
After the war. No.
There was a lot of... I feel like there was a lot of... The gender rules had changed during the war, right? Women had started working, and then they wanted to continue working after the war, and some men didn't want women to continue working.
Well, that was the way it was out in the country, but around Washington it was... I didn't go... When I left to go up to Luray with Carl, I had to I resigned my government job, and so I could have tried to go back to government, but I didn't. I didn't want to work full time. Wanted to have a baby, couldn't have a baby, so I would go and got this job, which was at Connecticut Avenue. It was in a house, people from all different nationalities. It was a small unit. So that was exciting. So when I came back from Europe, I must have worked a little while then. Then keep trying to have a baby. Well, maybe you should quit work and stay at home and just relax. So I quit work, stayed home, still no baby. Then I'm not one to stay home. So then I got my job with the big law firm.
Okay.
I answered an ad and I got this Hogan and Hart downtown.
How long were you not working for?
Probably 6 months, or I guess, or
okay. So when did you apply for the law firm? 1947, maybe?
No, it was later than that. You were born in 50, so I must have been working there. I was working there when I got pregnant.
Okay, so 48 or 49.
So, yeah, 48 or 49.
Was the pregnancy a big surprise since you've taken all this time?
I worked hard to get pregnant. That's another story because I went to Planned Parenthood, and now with all this stuff about Planned, that's another interesting story.
Wow.
But I did get pregnant, and I did have your mother. See, she actually was born 49, so that I was working there, and it must have been 48 and 49. That was downtown at 14th and G. I loved working downtown in Washington. I rode the bus.
It is 3 o'clock.
Carl was working at the... He came back to agriculture, and they had to take him back. And he stayed at agriculture until Carl was born. That was also 51.
52, probably.
52. Mm-hmm. And then he transferred it. Carl was born 51. Carol was born at the beginning of
50.
50, and he was born 51.
Okay. So you had 2 babies back to back.
Yeah.
What did you guys think about the, I guess that was really the beginning of the Cold War around that period. Did you guys think that there might be another war with Russia on the horizon?
Yeah, I guess it was definitely the Cold War time, but that wasn't that was mostly emotional.
But then the Korean War happened.
And then the Korean War happened in there, so.
I don't remember the years of the Korean War.
So anyway, we're back in Washington. That was.
Where did you live?
Then we had this apartment out off Columbia Pike.
Oh, in Virginia.
But someplace in there, we had an apartment in Arlington Village. That's where Carl's mother lived. We had to hound the woman to death till she gave us an apartment.
Did you keep working when you had Mom? Or did you stop
No,
working?
as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I quit. But she was born in Arlington Village. We lived in Arlington Village.
Was she a good baby?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then Chris was born, and then they built a development for veterans south of Alexandria of little homes selling for about $12,000 to $15,000. No. See, you all just have to remember times were so different. This was on top of next to the Belhaven Country Club, good neighborhood south of Alexandria. And so we bought one of them because we were living in there when Chris was born. And we had the bigger one. It was $15,000. It was 2 stories, had 2 bathrooms. And it was green. And so...
How did you feel about the green color?
The what?
The green. Did you like the green color?
Oh, yeah. You had a choice of green. They were shingles, wooden shingles.
Oh, okay.
And ours was like a cottage with 2 stories. Some were just 12,000 ones were 1 story. But it was a big unit. This man's name was Gosnell, and he was a smart man to buy that piece of property, and there was no road up to it. We, the purchaser, paid to have that road paid, and our church was built on that road, and we were happy. Most of the people there were veterans with little children.
So did you have friends with your neighbors?
Mm-hmm. Our next door neighbor had a little boy the same age as Carol, and he had been Eisenhower's pilot. He was a pilot, and he was Eisenhower's pilot. So they were nice, and we were all about the same age.
Did you like being at home with the babies?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you miss working?
Oh yeah, I didn't go. I told you what. I didn't go to work till you all were well into school.
Till Carl and Mom were?
Hmm?
Until Carl and Mom were in school, you went back to work?
Went back to work. No, not after I got pregnant with you. I didn't go till they were in school. And then I only went to work 4 hours a day. I never worked when they were home. Never had it. But that was the next house. we lived in a little greenhouse, and then another development. The next era for the veterans. All this is in Tom Brokaw's book. If you ever take the time to read it, we just did what everybody did. So the next level was split levels, and that was over Franconia, called another road, and that was a nice house.
Why did you switch houses? Because you just needed more space?
You go bigger and better. I mean, that one was probably 18,000. It had a garage. Living was, it was not plentiful.
Was Paul at the Pentagon by this time? Okay.
Yeah. See, Chris had been born and Carl had gone to the Pentagon. Okay. So we could afford the greenhouse.
What was your first job after the children were born?
Well, that comes much later. Oh, in the second house, the split level, that was in a development. Both of these are in developments, built for. And Carol went to first grade there when we lived in that house. In those days, the teachers liked to be invited to lunch. So we invited her teacher up to lunch, and in the conversation it developed that Carol wouldn't talk. She never talked. So, and the teacher was brand new and wanted to do everything just right. It developed that her theory was if she put Carol in with the dumb little boys, that maybe she would talk more. So she put Carol in with the... Well, when I heard that, of course, I exploded. My little darling in with the dumb boys. And we didn't... Carl didn't go to that school. He went in that same house. We moved from there when Carol was in... She must have been in 6th grade, and he was in 4th grade when we moved to
the split level?
No, we're in a split level now during these years when they went to school.
Were there any, how were they as siblings? Were they very good to each other? Or did they fight? Were there rivalries, competitions?
They were good. One time in the split level, we had another part of my life. We were charter members of this Methodist church when we lived in the greenhouse with all the veterans. And we did not have state kindergarten. So we were going to start a kindergarten in our church. And I was on that planning committee. I worked a long time. And luckily I hired this wonderful woman who became a real friend. And she was just one of those born teachers with young children. So both children went there and had this happy kindergarten. Okay, so now we've moved out of the neighborhood, and Carl's has to go to this brand new school, 1st grade. Well, he came home every night in a foul temper, just upset. And finally, we said, now, and mean to his sister. So finally one night I said, you just have to go up to your room until you can be nice and be good to your sister. Well, he went in and sat down on the steps. Split level had steps. And he sat there and he started crying. He said, I thought it would be so nice, and isn't nice at all. It broke my heart. See, they'd had such a good kindergarten. So, so that's when I wanted to move back to our good neighborhood off Mount Vernon. This neighborhood wasn't very nice over there. So we eventually built the house and moved back. He was in 4th grade when we moved, so she must have been in 6th when we moved back to Mount Vernon.
Was it in the same neighborhood where the greenhouse was?
No. It was the same side of town, but not kind of. It was a nice neighborhood.
And you were there all the way up until they graduated from high school, right?
After we built our house.
Mm-hmm.
After we built our house. And again, if you read Tom Brokaw's, that after the war, the veterans bought a small, inexpensive house. Then they moved to the split level, and then they moved to a 3-bedroom, 2-bath Rambler in a nice neighborhood. And that's exactly what we did. All the veterans in the world. And I still did not work. After I got pregnant with Carol, I didn't work for a long time. I didn't work until one of them went to 1st grade.
What did you do at home? Did you watch the television while you took care of the children?
Played bridge, and took care of the children, worked in the church. I was still active in the church. And then after when both of them were gone, I just couldn't take it any longer. So I said,
So what year did you go back to work, do you think?
Let's see. Well, they were born in 1551, so they started the school 6 years later, which would have been
56, 57.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a plan for Mom? Did you think that you were going to have her go to college for your undergraduate school?
Sure. All of our generation, our children were going to college. I was...
But for a woman, that was a little bit controversial at that time, right? Wasn't...
No, not...
UVA had just become co-ed.
Mm-hmm.
Or she
College.
went to Kalamazoo. How did Mom end up going to Kalamazoo in Michigan, of all places?
Okay, we skipped that. We came back to the good neighborhood, and we were in fairly good schools. And went through high school there. And applied for college. It was hard. It was hard to get into college. Well, believe it or not, don't ever throw this up to her. She was turned down. She was a good student, but she really wasn't a serious student at that time. So anyway, she actually was turned down at the college she applied to. And by that time I had gone to work with Eric at the Association of American Colleges. And we had, colleges. We were members of all those colleges. So we needed a place for her to go. Didn't get in. She didn't apply to UVA because they didn't take women. That's the next story. So my friend, one of the men at the office, was a member of Liberal Arts College Association, and he talked about this school in Kalamazoo, Michigan, that had such a wonderful overseas program and a very good program. And they would see that she got in. So that's how she went to Kalamazoo. It was in retrospect, it would have been better if just to let her stay out a year and then go to the Virginia schools. But
So she wasn't very happy in Kalamazoo.
no, she was not happy at Kalamazoo. But it was very good for her. And she met some nice, and she wasn't that good in math like the rest of you are. So I called up the president.
Oh no.
My daughter is strange here, and she's having trouble with math. Would you see that she gets some local help?
Did Mom know that you did this?
Yeah, I think so. Well, she stuck it out, though. Then she made the decision to come. And while she was so unhappy, she didn't even think of applying to Virginia Tech. That wasn't particularly that's where the other students went. But a lot of her friends went to Virginia Tech. Now, that's what she should have done. She was turned down at William and Mary, but she should have gone and applied to William. And all of her friends were at Tech, and they were having the best time, and they were happy. And there she was, miserable and unhappy.
In Michigan.
In Michigan.
Now, Carl, when did you realize that he was such an outdoorsman? He did Boy Scouts, right? And he became an Eagle Scout
Well,
at
he did
18,
Boy
didn't he?
Scouts, yeah. And after.
Did you imagine that he would eventually be living out in Wyoming and skiing and all that?
Well, after his college graduation, that was the in place to go, was Colorado Springs. All these graduates, because there they had access to, and this was these were the hippie days.
Oh.
What did you and Pa think about Carl's decision to move out west and kind of roam around?
Well, you don't want to get into his life.
Well, did you worry about him, or did you have faith that would all work out, or?
I guess I just had, of course I always, I worry about all of you. But, no, that's what he wanted to do, and that's what he did, so. But anyway, let's get back to getting my children in college. But, so Carol took it upon herself, though, to apply, to decide to come back to Tech. So she came back to Tech for her second year, and I give her credit. Is that she worked hard at Kalamazoo, and it was, and she learned to work, because she'd sort of drifted in high school. She was always so smart. She made good grades without doing much work, and so in Kalamazoo, but it was a good experience for her in the cold weather. So then. And she got herself back to Tech. And see, that was the year then that Carl went to college. He was 2 years behind her, but he went to UVA, Virginia, to the university. Mm-hmm. And that was hippie. That was 1970. And the year he went to University of Virginia was the year they admitted women for the first time. It was an all-male school. Mm-hmm. And had been a coat and tie school all the years. And they eliminated the coat and tie. And it was hippie time. And you talk about worrying. That's when you worry.
How did you feel about the time period of the hippies and Nixon and all that? Did you worry a lot about the country?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nixon was, it was interesting. Carl and I both say we value the time we had in Washington more than anything else, because you were in the middle of everything. You knew what was going on. Mm-hmm. That's why it's so shocking to me when I meet people my generation down here. I'll mention something like June the 6th. That was the day of the invasion. They never heard of it. I mean,
really?
We just, we were so involved in everything, and so we were grateful for that.
So you said you went back to work for Eric. Is that Virginia's husband?
Oh, so the kids were.
They were in first grade or so?
Second grade, or about sixth grade. And then, by that time, I had met Virginia and Eric when I worked at FAO, and we became friends. And Eric was the vice president of the place. So he said, well, why don't you come and work for me part-time to see if you like it? So I said yes, and he worked up on our street. See, they were up on our street. So I went to work for him as his assistant secretary, and while they went to school, I would always be home to pick them up, and when they, well, so that was a good job, and I did that. I did that till when I was very active in church work, in the kindergarten, and one day, Carl had a little tricycle, and I was very, and one day I was at the church doing my work, and he was at home with a sitter, I guess, and one of the neighbors saw him on his little tricycle going down the middle of the main road. He was going to his mother. Well, that right then, I quit all outside activities and was at home. But I worked for Arrogant on that arrangement maybe a couple of years. But I'd work just 3 hours. I'd go in about 9, and I had a parking space. Parking space is very important.
So then when Carl and Mom graduated high school, did you go back to work?
Yes. Yes. When your mom went to a college, I think I went back.
For Eric, working for Eric or somebody else?
Yeah, Eric in Virginia. And then, and Carl, in the meantime, I didn't like the schools for Alec, for Carl. So in 7th grade, we had middle school. And it started at 7th and 8th. And he went to the new middle school. And his teacher, and it was a brand new school, and the most ineffectual man I ever met in my life was principal. And Carl was very shy and backward and didn't talk. The only thing he liked, he was introduced to orchestra, and he loved that. But his math teacher had nervous breakdown, and she didn't like boys, and she didn't like teaching. Well, so I had written, one time I called that principal up, and I said, now he's very private, very shy, but I'd like for you to talk to him, but don't embarrass him. So the dumb principal announced over the loudspeaker when this little boy come to his office. Well, that was my finals. I think that year the only decent grade he got was in band.
Oh.
So that summer, they had this good boys' school, St. Stephen, all boys, coat and tie. And so, well, I would apply there, but he had to go to summer school. He had to take English and math. But they accepted him, and he passed the test and everything. So we thought, well, he could go there for 7th and 8th grade, junior high, and then come back. But anyway, the decision was later made that he could stay there all 4 years, which was good for him, all year. And I had to drive. I drove him until he could learn to drive.
Was it expensive? The school?
Yes. We talk about money. So I went back to work so he could go to private school, and so your mom, that was the year that they went to Europe in college, so she could go to Europe and he could go. So I went back. I worked, and Carl made a good salary, but you didn't make that kind of money.
Mm-hmm.
Did you and Paul ever get to go on more trips? Did you ever get to go to Europe yourself again?
Oh yeah, we had lots of trips. We, when the children were little, you know, all these states have very great state parks, and they had camps in the summer, or cottages you could. So every summer we would manage to get a cottage, and we'd have a camping trip in the mountains. In Virginia, I think we'd been to practically every one. And then when the kids got older, and we're going, we had we had about 3 trips to Europe. One with Eric in Virginia, and a couple on our own.
What areas?
Organization called Elder Hostel for seniors. We took advantage of everything we could, you know. We didn't feel, we weren't poor. We were lucky. I mean, we were professionals, young professionals.
You went to Delaware too, right? To Bethany Beach?
Went where?
You went to the beach up in Delaware too, right? Bethany Beach?
Oh, we went, yeah. Every summer we would have a trip to the beach. That was when they were teenagers. Carol was.
And then you'd go to West Virginia, right? And Chris would get sick in the car every time.
Okay, this is real life. My mother's generation and earlier generation, when you got old, your daughters took care of you. This is it. You got old, your daughters took care of you. So, then of course I got married when I was only 21 years old, and I was going from home all that time. So anyway, Dad died, and Mom stayed on there, and but she was alone in this big house. So I had to go to West Virginia about once a month.
Wow.
Drive myself, and didn't know what to do. I mean, what do you do? I had 2 teenagers of my own, and a husband who wasn't very receptive to having a mother-in-law live with him. So that's right. I used to get in the car and cry all the way home because I didn't know what to do.
So what did you end up deciding to do?
Well, then we moved to Connecticut when you were born. So it was even more difficult for me to get out there.
But you had other siblings. Why didn't they take up some of the slack?
I'm just telling you the facts of life, my life. So then I was out there, and she passed out on the bathroom floor. So I realized, you know what? That's when I went, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Well, now, this is a true story. Well, that night, I cried, and I prayed, what am I going to do, God? Tell me what I'm going to do. Well, that night, now this is the only true revelation I've ever had. God told me, call Jen, just as plain as day. Call Jen. Well, Jen was a woman who lived on our street, lovely woman, and she and Mom were friends. In fact, she was an optometrist in that little town. So next day I approached Mom. I said, well, what do you think about asking Jen to come part-time? And well, she was acceptable to that. So I arranged for Jen to come in the evening, and they would eat dinner together, and then Jen would go home and Mom would go home, but at least somebody was there every day. So that worked for a while. That worked very well. They were happy together. They were both intelligent women. One time I went out there, they would read. Jen would read. Mom had vernacular. Jen would read, and they were reading Evergreen, one of those first of the out-and-out modern books, and there they were, they said, just giggling over that book, and they read the whole book. and it was, they were happy. Jed could play the piano, and they would play the piano. And but that came to an end. Jen was in an automobile accident and had to give that up. But,
Oh.
so it was rough. It was rough.
So then what did you do after that?
Well, I tried another woman, but it didn't work. It was just, the experience with Jen had been so good because she was such a fine person. So then, again, at the end of our rope, and Rosemary, so, do you want to hear all this?
Yes.
My sister Rosemary lived in Ohio, and she had 2 daughters. Another Rosemary, who was your kid's age, and Rosemary was her mom's favorite grandchild. Her favorite they were very much alike, and Rosemary had 4 little boys. So there was Rosemary found out that there was a new retirement home being built near where they lived, and it was going to be like apartments, 1 room, and we checked into it, and we thought, now that's perfect because Rosemary's her favorite. I wasn't her favorite. She wouldn't have been happy coming and living with me. And Rosemary's 4 boys were with my mother a lot. So there were the boys coming. So we checked into it and we rented a room there. And she lived there a couple of years. But I still made my monthly, I handled, her finances and everything, made all the arrangement.
Wow.
So we moved her out of her home in her town where she lived all of her life. But I will say she was game. She was a good sport about it.
What was your relationship like with your mom?
With what?
With your mom.
We liked each other very much, and she was a good mother to me. But after about 3 days, we'd had one of those touchy. You've had enough of each other.
It seems to be a
Don't you see
hereditary
that?
trait.
It's a human. This is true with it's this mother-daughter relationship. And when you live as long as I am, it's a typical stressful relationship. Because I've lived through it. See, I've been on both ends of it.
Yeah. That's true.
So, and I don't know the answer. I said, of all the smart people I know, why can't we come up with a better... This big warehoused in rooms is not the answer. But I can't come up with an answer.
Yeah. So how old were you then when your mom passed away? Because she was old. She was very old.
Oh yeah, she was 98 years old.
So you were in your 60s?
Where were we living? Well, we were in Connecticut.
Because I met your mom
Mm-hmm.
at least once.
I usually go by you. About the time that you were born, that was 82. And I think she died in 91. And 91, Carl and I would have been in our 70s. See, we were born in 20. It was hard. And I know it's hard on Carol. And I try to be as independent as I can, but it's there. That's human nature. And the thing is, it's so much guilt built up, and you just it's just human nature, mothers and daughters.
Mm-hmm. I know.
Well, particularly my mother's generation, see, because they had grown up with the idea, well, you live with your daughter when you get old.
That's interesting.
Now it's more or less a common, ordinary thing for people to go and live in retirement homes.
Yeah. But it's still hard. Like you said, there's no answer. There's no easy answer.
That's very, very hard. Very, very hard.
So you said Rosemary lived in Ohio.
Hmm.
You said Rosemary.
They lived in Ohio,
Lived
yeah.
in Ohio.
And so that meant, mother's lived in West Virginia, so that meant moving her completely up there.
Yeah. How many other siblings did you have?
How many what?
You asked.
How many other siblings did you have?
Well, I had Bob, and then who was older than me, and then Rosemary, who was 5 years younger, and then Dave, who was 16 years younger. But they all did their part. They went to see her, and they were good. And they would have her come to their.
And you were closest to Dave, is that right? Was he the sibling you were closest to?
Well, Bob and I, no, I guess Bob and I was. Bob and I, we went to college together. We had to live together, so we got along pretty well.
What happened during like Thanksgivings and Christmases? Did everybody get back together, or was it localized? Did you just have you and your children and Paul?
I guess Rosemary, I would say, Rosemary with these four little boys. She would take them and go to West Virginia, take all the toys for Christmas, and she was close to Mom. And and that was another story. Rosemary and Skip spent about 5 years living at home. So her little boys loved Mom. She was their grandmother. And so that was a happy time. So you just take life as it's dealt to you.
But what did you all do for Thanksgivings? Did you just have Thanksgiving in Virginia? You and Carl and
Yeah, no, later
Carl
on,
Sr.
much
and
later
Mom?
on, when the kids were 7, 9. But that we were very good friends with Virginia and Eric. So we would usually have Thanksgiving together at either their house or ours. And that's when they had the polar bear that
Oh,
Mom and Dad slept on. We would go there for dinner, and the two little ones would go upstairs to sleep on the polar bear.
That's funny.
We had happy times.
So when Mom was in college, did she get married when she was in college to her first husband?
Her generation, the life is made up of generations. They really is. And now that I've lived so long, I've lived through many different stages. When she was in college, and particularly back in my generation when they were in college, my generation went, they had to smoke. You had to smoke. Everybody became smokers, and many of them died with lung cancer. But Carol's generation, you had to get married. You were just a failure if you didn't have a boyfriend and didn't get married.
So that's why she married this man so young?
Well, she wasn't young. You graduated from college.
Okay, so she was out of college by this time.
No, they got married the week they graduated.
Did they go to school together? Were they at the same
They were
school?
in college, in university together. That's what she meant.
Did she tell you she was going to get married?
No.
Were you in attendance at her wedding?
Hmm?
Were you in attendance at her wedding?
She and Jack got married by a justice of the peace. I don't think anybody was with them.
So this is like the same thing you did
Same
to your
thing I
parents.
did. I guess history repeats itself.
How did you and Paul react to this news?
I guess we were shocked. We'd met Jack was a decent young man. He was nice. He was a nice, friendly. He was the time to come in the house and throw his arms around you and be happy. And he was a nice young man. But he was just he was young too. I guess it was, I remember when I got the news, my bridge club, we were meeting to have a dinner, and I went to dinner. So I think I was just in shock. I don't think I made any announcement or anything. It was a shock.
Well, how did you think their marriage went? Did you hear the details of it? Did you know? When the divorce finally happened, did you expect it by that point?
As I said, Jack was a nice kid. She was a nice girl. And they were in school, and everybody was getting married, and everybody had boyfriends. And so when they got out, she had made up her mind to apply to law school. And Jack, so moved to Charlottesville. Jack applied for a job with Shell or some in Charlottesville, and he got it. So the happy side of the story is, and they got an apartment and they moved to Charlottesville. And she rode her bike to work, to law school all the time. And they were happy. And for part of that time, Carl and Wendy were in Carl was still in college at Charlottesville. So then he worked. Carl's philosophy was this: we saved money for our children to go to college, and Carl would pay through your undergraduate programs. But if you had more that was up to you. So Jack paid their expenses, and they lived all through, and he put her through law school. He really did. He paid. I don't know what I should tell you. You want to hear all this?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is for posterity, Grammy. This is the truth. We have to hear it.
And Jack's mother and father were from Virginia, Richmond, I think. And we all met at graduation, and they were married by then. And she even made herself a wedding dress. So, they were planned. It was planned. She made a pretty dress.
Was Pa mad? Did he get?
No,
really
you weren't mad. We were just sort of stunned. But since they were, and she had an internship in Richmond that year before law school. Well, anyway, they lived in Charlottesville those 3 years, and as I say, he put her through law school. So then she got the job, and they decided to take the job in Connecticut. She had two offers. She could have gone to Jacksonville. She could have gone to. So they moved to Connecticut, and they had a nice apartment. The hottest summer in 50 years. And I had my blue Volkswagen. We'd all drove. Carl drove him up there. We rented this 2-room apartment in the house and no air conditioning.
Oh.
So they lived there. And these friends that she has now, Sheila, they were their friends in that time in Connecticut.
Hmm.
And Jack got a job, and then after got her through law school, he went and got his MBA, and she put him through MBA. So they were fair. One helped one, and each helped the other one. So he got his MBA, and they bought a nice little house.
Did they talk about having children?
No, I don't think they meant to have children right away. Jack's family had some health problems, I think. So, and we went up quite a bit, and they were very decent. One time they called, they said they wanted to come down. So they drove all the way down to Washington to tell us that they were going to get a divorce. It was good. They just, they were young when they got married, and they were different now. And so we went up and helped him move, and the thing I remember, Jack. I liked Jack, and as I say, he was a nice kid. And so we got her moved in an apartment in Greenwich, and he helped move. And the day came, they were moved, and I just can still see Jack just walking away with his back.
That's so sad.
It was
But it
sad.
wasn't acrimonious at all. It was just totally amicable split.
No, I don't think they were. I think they were friends. They weren't. They weren't. It wasn't a bitter divorce. They had been good to each other. They sold the house, and they all when they bought a car, and she loved yellow, so they bought this bright yellow car. And well, what kind was it? This is not a sports car, but bright yellow. I think that he got the car. He got the car, and she, and then they sold the house, and she moved into this apartment in Greenwich. But he walked away, and that was goodbye. I just felt sad.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to something positive. When did you first meet?
Do you want to take a quick break?
Oh, okay.
Is that enough? We'll take a break.
Yeah, let's take a break.
So, Grammy, can you tell us why Uncle Carl's nickname is Chris?
Yes. When he was a baby, he crawled on all fours, and he always crawled with his little rear end stuck up with the diaper on. So Eric, our good friend Eric, who loved puns and jokes, he said, well, why don't we call him Crisco because he's fat in the can.
That's really why you call him Chris.
So he became, we never called him Crisco, but we called him Chris. And we spelled it C-R-I-S, just like Crisco.
That is so funny. I did not know that.
And you said Uncle Carl made an announcement.
And then he was Chris all through until school came. And then he announced himself, from now on he was going to be Carl. So from that time, so all of his school papers and everything is Carl.
Oh my gosh.
But he's always been Chris to me and to Carol because that's what we all call him.
Well, so we have to go back. I think we missed some of your life stages. So Carl and Mom graduated and went to college. Did you all stay in Alexandria for a
Yeah,
while?
we stayed in our house. But see, by that time we had moved to our Beatty Drove house.
Okay.
That's the one we had built.
So how long did you stay in Alexandria after Mom and Uncle Carl left?
Until you were born.
Oh, okay.
We came up there after you were born. When you were.
Was it hard to leave?
No. But that was the real home. Your mother talks about how small that house is. Well, again, you go back to our generation. Then you build a split. You build a level, a ranch-style house with 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, and that's what we had. And it cost $40,000, and we paid off the mortgage, over the 30 years.
Well, what did you think about Connecticut? Did you like?
Connecticut.
Yeah.
So then that's when we decided, by that time we'd retired and really didn't have anything extra to do. And Carl had had his heart attacks. And your mother had just been hadn't been transferred down here yet.
No.
So I said, well, why didn't we come up there and live and be with our baby? And so that's what we did. We sold the house, moved up there. It wasn't, I guess we'd moved so many times, but that house is the one that we actually had built and paid for.
And you went from a house to an apartment building, right?
Yeah, not on Strawberry Hill. That was the second move. We went and rented a condo downtown, and then later on we moved to the one on Strawberry Hill.
This is when Catherine was the only one there.
But anyway, we sold the house, and we're on our way. and that very day, that very week, Carl's sister died in Georgia. And we settled on the house. We had my car and his car. Left the house, and he drove south to Georgia, and I drove north to Connecticut. And I had to check the check for the house, the cash out, with many instructions that I'd get there and put it in the bank. So I drove, and the next day took it to the bank, and I had my little baby with me in the back seat. She was in her car seat. We went downtown to the bank where we'd made arrangements to open the account. Got the account open. The little angel was sitting quietly. We got in the car, started home. It was one of these downtowns where you go in one door of a bank and out another one. So we went out a way we didn't come in. And I realized I didn't have a slightest idea in the world where I was. There I was with this baby. And her parents were both out of town, or Waldorf, New York. I'll never forget that. We got the check in the bank, but we came out of that bank. So, we finally found our way. Well, I'd never been up there to drive. I mean, I just arrived the day before.
Well, going back a little bit, when did you meet Walter?
Oh, yeah.
When did she meet Walter?
Or no, when did you meet Walter? And did you only meet them when they were engaged? Or did you meet them when they were boyfriend and girlfriend?
We met him pretty early. I don't know whether we met him up there or... I don't. He had nothing to do with their breakup with Jack. There was no connection with that.
Mm-hmm.
She met him. I don't know where you met him.
New York City, right?
Mm-hmm. Of course, we liked him. Connecticut was good. It made me realize that I was more of a Southerner than I am a Northerner.
Well, eventually you became friends with Aunt Ginny, right?
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, in some respects.
Aunt Jenny was wonderful to me. Wonderful to me. She, of course, had lived all her life there, so we'd go into New York. I would drive and she would direct. We went to the art galleries, we went to the Met, we went to the opera, we went to plays. Well, see, she had access to everything, but she was good to me.
This was just the two of you doing things together?
Yeah, just the two of us doing this thing.
I don't think I realized you spent a lot of time together.
Hmm?
I don't think I knew that you spent a lot of time together.
Oh yeah, we really liked each other. We went up to Yale. Some of their family, the grandfather knew rich. He was rich, and he knew important. So when Georgiana was born, he gave her a painting. Well, that painting became. Have you heard this story?
No.
That painting, it was this young artist. So over these 40 years, it became famous. And she gave it to Yale, didn't give it to him on loan, and it was hung in the wall up there. So we went up to Yale to see that picture, and that picture became very valuable. I think it was finally sold for about $1 million.
Wow.
See all these little interesting things.
What did you think of Aunt Ginny? I've heard that she had quite a force of personality. She was definitely the leader of that family. Aunt Ginny. Wasn't she sort of like the matriarch? She had a lot of, everybody deferred to her.
Well, yeah, she was very, she married 3 times, and each time one was more wealthy than the other.
Smart way to do it.
Her first Horn, the girl's name was Horn, and he was from Pittsburgh, was wealthy, owned a department store. But she and I we sincerely liked each other as good friends.
That's great. I don't think it's very frequent for two people to be brought together as part, families of their children,
different
people who
kinds
got
of
married.
life,
Yeah.
Because she really had a storied life, with wealth. And there I am from West Virginia, but she liked me and we had a good time together.
So then when Mom's job transferred to South Carolina, you and Pa moved back to Washington, right?
Well, we were still in Connecticut. Everybody, when we didn't know what we wanted to do, and she kept wanting us to come down and see Greenville, and we did. We came down, and Greenville wasn't. And she liked Greenville, and we liked Greenville. So we went back, and we thought, well, we have such fond memories of Washington. Let's take a whole year and go back to Washington. So we did. We packed up and moved back to Washington and stayed a year, and then we came down here.
Well, how did you like that year in Washington? What were your impressions of Washington at that time?
Yeah, it was fun. We did all the things we remember doing. We went to the museums and everything that we'd ever done. Several of our old friends were still around there. So.
But you had always intended to only go back for 1 year?
Mm-hmm.
Were you always planning to just go back for 1 year?
Yeah, just to see. But that's when we made up our mind that we would come down, because we wanted to be with the two kids. But we still wanted to see if we still loved Washington so much, so we went back. Rented an apartment in Fairlington.
Mm-hmm.
And just stayed the year.
So what were your impressions of Greenville when you first moved?
We liked Greenville. We came down here, a real estate agent took us around and took us to all these places out in the suburbs, and I finally said, I don't want to live in the suburbs. I've had suburbs. So then she finally showed us McDaniel Green, and we drove in there. I said, okay, this is what I have in mind. A nice looking place in the middle of town.
Mm. Right next to the Spaghetti Warehouse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was a good, we were happy in Greenville.
Should we end it here then for now, or since we're in Greenville, pick it up later?
We were happy in Connecticut too. We went to a lot of concerts, and we had another friend, Janet. We went to concerts, and we did a lot of things.
What was your favorite time of your life, looking back?
Oh, I don't know. Everything was. Every year has been so fraught with. You think back what this century has covered: wars,
I know.
depressions. Carl and I both grew up in the Great Depression, and so I don't know.
Was there a decade that you were happiest, or?
I think the happiest year was my year in Parkersburg when I went to business school.
Really?
I was free for the first time, and different people, and they danced. I had never danced, and the boys. They had a couple of boys who were excellent dancers. I think that was probably the happiest year.
What was the worst year, the hardest year?
Oh, I don't know. There's so many hard years. But you weather them. And Carl and I stayed together for 70 years. Now that's quite a record. You should be proud of that. Your parents lasted.
Did you ever wonder, was there ever a time when you thought you might split up?
Oh, yes. I think I told you that when the kids were little, we wouldn't leave because whichever one left had to take the children. And nobody would take the children. It was better to stay together than to take the children. Life is not easy. Never.
So after 71 years of being with Paul, what kind of advice do you have to give about long-term relationships? What do you feel is best to do?
What I failed, the failures, communication, consideration, and just I think communication is the biggest failure in a relationship.
Well, do you think the pros outweighed the cons when you look at your 70-year relationship?
Oh,
do you think
yes.
that it's
Oh,
worth
but-
aspiring to that?
Oh no, I'm glad we had our and that's my advice. Even when you get tired of each other, and we did stay together, and I think we were both happy that we stayed together.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about today's day and age with the difficulty finding lasting relationships and the 50% divorce rate? It's a very different time.
Such different times. I can't understand these times any more than you can understand what we went through. So, you just can't compare one thing to the other. Because it's I feel sorry for your generation and the even younger ones coming up. I feel very sorry for you because you've missed so many of the things that made memories for us.
What do you mean?
Well, doing things, I don't know what I mean, but it's a different kind of relationship the young people now have. And I think you're right. So many of the marriages now just say, well, I'll just take this one because I don't have any other chance, and then, yeah. Carl and I knew each other. Oh, one thing I never did tell you. You know, as I said, we did a lot of things around town. There were so many things to do. They had paddle boats that you could rent on the tidal basin. So we would rent tidal basin on the road, and that's when he proposed to me.
Aww.
Really?
On the tidal basin.
That's cute.
Did you expect it, or were you totally surprised?
Were you hoping for it?
Again, you see, it's just this feeling that life just carries you along. You know, it just, we liked each other, and drifted.
Well, you knew pretty early on that you wanted to have children. I mean, you had children.
Oh, yeah, after the war, we wanted to have children. It wasn't easy.
How old were you when you had Mom, when you had Carol?
Well, she was born in 50, and I just turned 21. No,
I think you were 30.
29 or
the
30?
day before.
So you were 30?
In 49. So I was 29.
Yeah.
29. Carl was 29. Yeah. So that's.
What do you think about the differences between your children? Were you, when they were growing up and, you know, Carl's become this great outdoorsman?
No, he wasn't an outdoorsman. He was a real recluse. He was a real loner. And it was a great decision to decide whether to take him out of public school and let him go to private school, because it meant take him out of the neighborhood and what few. But he was in this wonderful scout troop, and that kept him connected to the neighborhood. And then he had in high school, he had a good Mr. who had the cross country, and I think he was a great influence on Carl too. He's a typical cross country runner, alone. That's what he likes. Just like now, he wants to go to the mountains alone.
So I have kind of a meta question. So throughout your life, you've worn many hats. You've been a mother, a wife, a grandmother, a working professional, a student. What was probably your favorite identity that you had?
Being a mother, I guess. Because I guess psychologically, that's what we're meant for. When you go right back to basics, that's what a woman was made to bear children, and the man was made to. The man carries the seed for the child. I didn't know that for a long time, and then, and that's what we were originally meant for. And that's why this only women can bear children, for one thing. A lot of these things, come with age. Before a lot of things I didn't know. I was very young, younger than you two right now.
That's true.
To think, think things through, make your decision.
Well, you said that there were some hard years. Were the hard years, was it characterized by stress in your interpersonal relationships, or was it stress due to like the state of the country, like the Vietnam War, or
No,
JFK
I
being
think-
assassinated, or the Civil Rights Movement?
No, I think what it boils down to is your personal relationship. That's what really matters.
Right.
You have to give a lot to your personal relationships.
I mean, you've lived through so many great events in American history, but most of them never touched you to the extent that the Depression and World War II did. Even JFK assassinated or Vietnam War, those things were at a further distance to you compared to those things that happened during your young years that you were close
They were
to.
very, very important happenings in our life. Remember that. People and working. I like to work. I like to be with people. So I was much happier when I was working. I just like to be with people and have a purpose. We had a good life. We had a good life and a good marriage. So I feel blessed. We had our ups and downs. No, you do. You'll have lots of ups and downs in any relationship. And again, you just sort of go through them, making decisions as you go.
Well,
you don't have a plan, I don't think.
You two are very unique in some respects. I mean, you were very good grandparents to Catherine and I. A lot of people that I talk to, a lot of my friends say they don't know their grandparents at all. They have no relationship with them whatsoever.
I think
So-
the best decision we ever made in our whole life was to come to Greenville to be grandparents to our two children. I really think that's the best decision we ever made.
Well, we felt lucky that you were there.
Yeah.
And we've been, we were really repaid because you both have loved us and respected us. And so I say that's the best decision we ever made.
Well, we were lucky. You practically raised both of us.
Yeah.
You were our second mother.
Yeah. So I guess when Mom had children, that's when you decided to go live up near them. Did you ever talk about maybe living out in Wyoming near Uncle Carl?
We all went to Carl and Kathy's wedding though.
Yeah, that must have been fun.
Carl had a couple relationships, and he would bring them home, and we liked all his young girls he picked. The one called Wendy, who's now a lawyer, we loved her horses. But they didn't marry, of course, they didn't. But they were together 3 or 4 years, I think. Then there was one called Holly. I think she was the artist. And in New York, I knew that wouldn't last because he's not a New York type. And then there was another one in college. What was her name? And he didn't date all through high school. So we felt, Carl and I were just convinced, the minute he got to college, the first girl who landed him, he'd marry. We were wrong. We were wrong.
No, he took his time.
He didn't date at all. Some young girl, they had St. Agnes, which was girls who some young girl invited him to her prom, and I know it must have been the most miserable night of her life. He went.
I guess Mom was the one who fulfilled the prophecy. She ended up getting married on graduation or next to graduation. Did she date a lot in high school? Was she always dating
But
boys?
that's what I tried to tell you. That they had to have a boyfriend. That was the most important thing in their life. You had to have a boyfriend. You had to have a relationship.
Did you try to tell her that that wasn't
No,
how it was?
One time I was really proud of your dad. She was very much in love with this boy, and finally we told her that she had to break it off. And that's one time I was proud of your dad. He stood up of Carl. He stood up with me, and we told her that she had to break it off.
Why did they have to break it off?
Oh, they wanted to be together all the time.
Mm.
And I was working. Now, I was working at that time. And it was just getting too serious and too...
They were limiting their opportunities.
But that was that generation. As you get older, you think back to things that were peculiar, like your high school friends. You had different thoughts.
It's just interesting though because I know I could see how Mom would be like that, but in his history books, when we learn about that time period, we think about the countercultural hippie revolution, which was not all about having a steady boyfriend or girlfriend and getting married. It was more about
Having
experimentation and love and drugs and peace and stuff like that.
Oh, that was their generation, your generation.
But Mom was not a countercultural.
Mm-mm.
She was very traditional, very conservative, it seemed like.
And it was funny. Mom graduated in '68, and that was all during this. And Carl from high school. Carl graduated in '70. That's 2 years, and in those 2 years, the world changed.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, did we miss anything important?
We can come back for another 3 hours another time.